The year was 1943, and America's rail lines pulsed with the movement of war. On the evening of September 18th, a train of sealed cars rattled into Camp Swift, near Bastrop, Texas. Inside were hundreds of weary German prisoners, men of the Afrika Korps captured in Tunisia only months before. Their boots were caked with desert dust, their uniforms faded from sun and surrender. They expected punishment, humiliation, perhaps even violence. Instead, as the iron wheels screeched to a halt and the heavy doors clanged open, the first thing some of them heard was not the bark of orders, but the sharp, playful yelp of dogs. Under the glare of arc lamps, prisoners stumbled down from the train. Some shielded their eyes, others tightened their jaws. In the shadows beyond the wire, American guards stood silently, rifles slung at ease. But just beside them, tails wagged, a German shepherd strained against its leash. While a smaller terrier darted in circles on the gravel, one soldier whispered to another, "They brought dogs for us to hunt us." The fear was palpable. Yet within moments, the confusion deepened. The dogs were not threatening, not snarling, but watching with bright, eager eyes. And soon the prisoners would learn something unimaginable, that some of them would be allowed to keep their own dogs brought from the ports of capture. This single gesture broke every expectation. The German military code had taught them to brace for hardness, to endure captivity with clenched teeth. Instead, America's message seemed contradictory. You are our enemy, but you may keep the companions of your heart. Diaries later recovered from the camp reveal those first stunned hours. Gefreiter Karl Meissner wrote on September 19th, "I thought we were being mocked. Yet there stood Fritz, my shepherd, still mine, still looking at me as if the war had not broken everything, even as guards counted them, even as fences loomed." That sight unsettled the prisoners more than the rifles. The barbed wire was sharp, but the presence of dogs, loyal creatures who knew no politics, hinted at something else entirely. In the dim barracks that first night, men whispered to one another, was this generosity a trick, or something far stranger? The possibility that their captors were not the monsters propaganda had painted. The opening chapter of their captivity had begun with a paradox. Enemy soldiers, expected to be stripped of all dignity, were met instead by the wag of a tail. 1,000 contradictions trembled in that moment, a reminder that war could confine men, but could not so easily chain the bonds between humans and their animals. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now in your part of the world? Morning at Camp Swift revealed a routine unlike any the prisoners had imagined. The clang of the camp bell summoned them for roll call, boots striking gravel in practiced unison. But between the lines of khaki and gray came softer sounds, the patting of paws, the shake of fur, the insistent whine of a dog eager for attention. Instead of the dogs being taken from them at arrival, guards nodded indifferently as several prisoners carried leashes or bent to scratch behind furry ears. It was a freedom so trivial on the surface. Yet to men who expected the cold steel of confinement, it was revolutionary. The U.S. Army had calculated this leniency not from sentiment, but from policy. Regulations issued in 1943 emphasized humane treatment, consistent with the Geneva Convention. Numbers tell the scale. Over 371,000 German POWs were eventually held in the United States, spread across more than 500 camps, and within that vast machinery of control, something as small as allowing dogs became a quiet act of both mercy and psychological strategy. Prisoners who felt respected were less likely to resist or sabotage. One of those men was Unteroffizier Heinrich Bauer, a former mechanic from Bremen. In a letter intercepted by censors, he wrote to his wife, "I thought America would strip us of all things. Yet I walk each evening with Lotte, as if on our street at home. It is unbearable. This kindness I do not know how to feel." His words capture the unease of men trapped between two worlds, defeated soldiers bound by wire, and pet owners who found themselves still allowed a fragment of normal life. Even gossip spread through the barracks like sparks. Those who arrived without dogs muttered about favoritism. A prisoner named Dieter joked bitterly, "We should have surrendered with chickens. Perhaps they would allow us eggs." Laughter followed, but envy lingered for the dog owners. However, every small moment was magnified. feeding scraps of bread, brushing dirt from fur, or watching a shepherd nap by the bunk made captivity feel less like a cage. American guards, too, were disarmed by the sight. Sergeant William Harris, stationed at Camp Swift in late 1943, later recalled that he found it difficult to maintain a posture of suspicion when a prisoner's dog bounded toward him wagging its tail. He once tossed a stick absent-mindedly, only to watch both prisoner and dog chase it together for a moment. Uniform and rifle meant nothing. The contradictions deepened with each passing day. Barbed wire and machine guns surrounded the camp, yet inside its limits, men still experienced the rhythms of companionship. A barking dog in the yard could drown out the whistles of passing trains, carrying the illusion, brief but piercing, that life might hold fragments of ordinary humanity even in wartime captivity. The rhythm of camp life hardened quickly. At dawn, bugles sounded and prisoners lined up, counted in groups of 50, then marched out for labor details cutting timber, harvesting crops, or repairing fences under the watchful eye of guards. Yet woven into this strict routine was the anomaly of dogs trotting alongside their owners. A black shepherd named Rex patted at Carl Meissner's heel as he swung an axe into cedar trunks. Another prisoner, Franz Weber, carried a terrier wrapped in his coat during cold mornings, the little creature's nose poking out like a secret reminder of home. Such images clashed with every notion of imprisonment. In Europe, prisoners were stripped of even their belts and shoelaces. Here, in Texas, men watched American guards tolerate wagging tails and dusty paw prints on barrack floors. Diaries captured the strangeness. On October 4, 1943, Meissner wrote, "We march under rifles, yet when the roll call ends, Rex leaps into my arms. I feel both free and chained in the same breath." Statistics reveal the broader backdrop. Camp Swift alone held more than 7,000 prisoners at its peak, and across the U.S., nearly 90% of POWs were put to work in agriculture. Their labor filled gaps left by 16 million Americans in uniform. In Bastrop County, cotton yields rose by 18% in 1944, due in no small part to the strong arms of men who had once fought at El Alamein. Against this massive economic contribution, the presence of a few dozen dogs seemed trivial, yet for the prisoners themselves, it carried profound meaning. Everyday details flavored these days. Men traded crusts of bread for dog bones from the kitchen slop. Guards overheard arguments about whose dog was cleverest. A barber inside the camp once clipped hair while a mutt slept under his chair, the sound of snores blending with the scrape of scissors. Even the barking became a part of the camp's soundtrack, echoing against wooden barracks in counterpoint to the constant rattle of typewriters in the command office. Yet tensions simmered beneath the surface. Those without dogs grew resentful, whispering that men with pets were treated better. Rumors spread that guards gave more food to prisoners who owned animals, though records show rations remained equal. One heated night, a fistfight broke out when a prisoner accused another of using camp soap to bathe his dog while men went unwashed. The commandant intervened, punishing both men with extra work shifts. Still, the gossip endured. These contradictions, the monotony of hard labor, the startling presence of dogs, the petty jealousies among men stripped of everything created a rhythm unlike any other prison system of the war. Each evening, as the sun sank beyond the Texas hills, the barracks grew quiet except for the shuffle of boots, the creak of wooden bunks, and the low sighs of dogs curling against their masters, behind barbed wire. Captivity had acquired an almost domestic soundtrack. By winter of 1944, life inside Camp Swift had settled into a paradoxical pattern: harsh labor under guard, yet evenings punctuated by the warmth of wagging tails. It was during these long nights that letters and diaries revealed the undercurrents of envy and whispered rivalries among the men. For those who arrived with dogs, the animals became companions and confidants. For those without, their absence grew like an open wound. One diary entry by Corporal Otto Klein, dated January 11, 1944, read, "The barracks are cold. I would give my bread ration for the warmth of a dog's body. Those who have them live like kings, while the rest of us sit in silence." This raw confession captures the psychological divide the animals created. To the men who clung to them, dogs were a tether to sanity. To others, they symbolized privilege inside a system designed to erase distinctions. Anecdotes spread through the camp like smoke. A group of prisoners once held a mock lottery, claiming the prize was an hour-walking Rex. The popular shepherd, another tale, half true and half exaggerated, told of a prisoner hiding a puppy under his greatcoat for days, feeding it crumbs until guards discovered the ruse. Even arguments flared. One man accused another of bribing a guard with cigarettes for extra time with his terrier, whether fact or gossip. These stories shaped the daily rhythm of captivity. The American guards observed all this with a mix of amusement and curiosity. Sergeant Harris noted in his log on February 2, 1944, that quarrels over dogs were more disruptive than complaints about food. He wrote simply, "The animals keep them docile," but also divided. In his remark lay a truth: the very creatures that softened hearts also sharpened jealousies. Numbers again give scale to the tension, with more than 7,000 men at Camp Swift and perhaps fewer than 50 dogs among them. The imbalance was stark. Statistically, less than 1% of the prisoners owned pets, yet their presence cast shadows across the entire camp. Even men hardened by desert battles felt reduced by the sight of another stroking a loyal animal at night. And yet, amid jealousy, small mercies endured. On March 3, 1944, Lieutenant Franz Weber wrote to his sister, "Hans has no dog. He comes to sit by mine each evening. He strokes her ears until he sleeps. I pretend not to notice." This quiet act of sharing reveals how envy sometimes softened into companionship, how even the smallest wag of a tail could dissolve the rigidity of military pride. The camp remained a place of contradictions, fences sharp with barbs, yet barracks filled with the gossip of who brushed whose terrier, or which mutt barked at the moon the loudest. And when silence fell, the dog's sighs reminded every man that captivity could never completely strip away the longing for affection, even if it belonged to someone else's animal. Spring of 1944 brought longer days, and with them a new rhythm of work. Prisoners marched in columns to nearby farms, their shovels clinking in rhythm with the chains on the gates. For many, the labor was grueling, yet the presence of dogs softened even these excursions. Farmers' children sometimes lingered at the fence lines, pointing and laughing as shepherds or terriers trotted beside their owners. One unforgettable afternoon near Bastrop, a young boy tossed a stick over the wire. To everyone's surprise, a prisoner's dog bounded after it, then dropped it back at the boy's feet. In that brief exchange, soldier, child, and animal were united by a game older than the war itself. Such moments created ripples. Guards who had once watched with rigid suspicion found themselves slipping scraps of bread or bones toward the dogs. In his diary dated May 10, 1944, Unteroffizier Heinrich Bauer confessed, "I cannot understand it. The same man who points a rifle at me slips fat to Lotta under the fence. Are they our enemies or our neighbors?" His confusion echoed across the camp. The numbers underline how extraordinary these encounters were. In Texas alone, over 70 camps employed more than 40,000 POWs in agricultural work. That spring, yields of corn and cotton climbed by measurable margins, their success resting partly on the sweat of men once trained to destroy America. Against such vast scales, a single shepherd chasing a stick might seem insignificant, yet to those present, it redefined the boundaries between enemy and human being. Everyday anecdotes cemented these fragile bridges. A farmer's daughter secretly left biscuits wrapped in paper near the gate, and the prisoners argued over whether to feed them to themselves or the dogs. A guard, caught whistling at a spaniel, blushed when the men laughed. These trivialities held immense weight, because they suggested the barbed wire did not seal out all warmth. Yet the prisoners themselves wrestled with inner conflict. Some felt uneasy, sensing that such kindness chipped away at the discipline drilled into them by years of Nazi indoctrination. One letter home, intercepted by censors, recorded a soldier writing, "This is more dangerous than hunger. They treat us as men. Our hearts do not know how to resist it." The presence of dogs turned every encounter into a test of loyalty to comrades, to ideology, to self. Was it betrayal to smile when an American child waved? Was it weakness to thank a guard for saving a dog from thirst? These questions haunted the barracks, whispered in the dark after lights out. And now, to you, the audience, if you were one of those prisoners, forbidden to leave yet, allowed the company of a beloved animal. How would you react? Would you see kindness or manipulation? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective gives life to history's most fragile contradictions. By the autumn of 1944, the dogs of Camp Swift had become fixtures of daily life, almost as familiar as the guard towers and floodlights. Yet beneath the routine, deeper psychological currents stirred. For some prisoners, the animals bridged an unspoken divide with their captors. For others, they embodied a tormenting reminder of freedom they could touch but not claim. Letters home reveal these contradictions with piercing honesty. Feldwebel Marcus Reinhardt, once a schoolteacher from Hamburg, wrote on October 21, 1944, "Each evening I walk Otto, my hound, along the wire, on the other side. Guards smoke and sometimes speak of their families. We are enemies, yet our dogs wag their tails together. It is unbearable, this glimpse of normal life that neither side can admit." His words show how simple routines could unmask the absurdity of war. Statistics again ground the scene. By late 1944, more than 371,000 German POWs were dispersed across 46 states, contributing millions of man-hours to American agriculture and industry. Yet in the records of Camp Swift, inspectors noted not sabotage, but notable calm. Attributed to recreational activity and presence of domestic animals, even bureaucracy quietly acknowledged the strange power of pets. Still, not all were soothed. In the barracks, men whispered that such leniency weakened their resolve. A sergeant of the Africa Corps warned in hushed tones that a dog's wag is more dangerous than the enemy's bullet. These words spread, stoking suspicion that kindness itself was a weapon. The prisoners lived suspended between gratitude and guilt, torn between the indoctrination of loyalty to Hitler and the undeniable warmth of shared humanity. Small anecdotes captured this dissonance. One night, a mutt barked furiously at the sound of distant thunder. Guards and prisoners alike rose from their bunks, peering into the storm-lit sky, only to share a laugh at their common fright. Another time, a terrier followed a guard out of the compound by accident, only to return wagging hours later, trailed by laughter from both sides of the wire. For American guards, too, the animals complicated roles. One wrote in a private log that it was easier to see the prisoners as men when their dogs jumped into their laps. Bonds formed not by ideology, but by shared affection for a creature that recognized no uniform. And now to you. The viewers, imagine yourself a guard in that camp, rifle in one hand, watching a prisoner's dog lick your boot. Would you maintain distance, or would you bend to scratch its ear? How thin is the line between duty and humanity? Leave your answer in the comments, because these moral questions, once whispered in barracks and watchtowers, still echo in us today. The war edged toward its conclusion in 1945, and with it the strange chapter of dogs in prison camps neared its end. News of Allied advances seeped into Camp Swift through guarded newspapers and whispered rumors. The men knew that repatriation was coming, yet as their release loomed, a new sorrow surfaced. Many would be forced to leave their canine companions behind. On April 9, 1945, Corporal Otto Klein recorded in his diary, "The talk in the barracks is no longer of battles, but of dogs. Who will keep them? What will become of them when we return?" His words echo a paradox of captivity. Men once loyal to a regime built on steel and fire were undone by the prospect of losing creatures of fur and breath. Numbers spoke to the scale of loss. By war's end, over 5,000 dogs were registered in American camps nationwide, though the majority belonged not to prisoners but to guards and farmers, for the handful of POWs allowed to keep theirs. The bond had grown so strong that separations were recorded in camp logs as emotional disturbances. In one case, a shepherd named Fritz refused food for 3 days after his master was shipped east for repatriation. Anecdotes carried even greater weight. Prisoner Franz Weber begged an American guard to take in his terrier, writing its name on the collar as if signing a will. Another man, Karl Meisner, wept openly when told his shepherd could not accompany him on the ship home. Guards, hardened by months of duty, admitted the sight was harder to endure than any outburst of anger. The barracks grew heavy with silence as departure orders spread. Men who had survived desert battles, long marches, and captivity now found themselves undone by goodbyes whispered to animals that had softened their chains. The final roll calls felt different. The barking of dogs, a reminder of bonds that neither barbed wire nor ideology could erase. As trucks rumbled away from Camp Swift, some men turned for one last glance. They did not look at the towers or the fences, but at the figures of dogs straining against leashes, tails wagging in confusion. The image burned deep prisoners carried off to uncertain futures, leaving behind the companions who had made captivity bearable. That is how this chapter closed, not with gunfire or speeches, but with the quiet sound of paws on gravel and the silence of men unable to say what they felt. Behind the wire, the dogs remained, living reminders that even in war, humanity can survive in the most unexpected forms. When the gates of Camp Swift and hundreds of other camps finally opened, the prisoners carried little with them beyond their uniforms and memories. Yet for many, the strongest memories were not of labor quotas, watchtowers, or barbed wire, but of soft fur under their hands and the quiet companionship of dogs who had stayed beside them. The war had been a contest of machines and numbers. 71,000 German prisoners spread across America, factories producing bombers every hour, armies moving millions across oceans. But within those staggering scales, it was the presence of a few animals that illuminated the fragile humanity buried beneath layers of ideology and discipline. Men who had once shouted orders in the desert now whispered to terriers in the dark. Guards who were trained to watch enemies found themselves kneeling to scratch the ears of shepherds. Farmers' children, who might have feared the faces behind the wire, learned to laugh when a dog chased a stick across boundaries drawn by war. These small moments did not change the course of battles, yet they altered the texture of captivity, softening edges that steel and propaganda could never erase. Years later, some former prisoners confessed that their greatest heartbreak was not the defeat of the Reich or the humiliation of surrender, but leaving behind the dogs who had reminded them that they were still men capable of affection, in dreams. The sound of barking lingered longer than the clash of artillery, in memories. The warmth of an animal's body meant more than the cold numbers of rations or work details. What remains for us? Looking back, is the paradox a nation at war with Germany, yet willing to let enemy soldiers cradle their dogs inside prison camps? It was an act both practical and profoundly symbolic, a reminder that even in the darkest moments of conflict, human beings search for traces of the familiar, the loyal, the tender. And so the story ends, not with victory parades or grand declarations, but with the simple image of a prisoner turning back, eyes fixed not on the flag of his captors, but on the wagging tail of a friend he would never see again.